Questions, questions, questions. There's so many questions in this world. I mean, and gosh, like don't we want to know it all? And some of the funniest and the best questions come from none other than the little kids that we love. Isaac, age 4. What does Santa smell like? Thomas, age 6. Where does the light go when you turn it off? Are there dinosaurs in heaven? Noah, age 5. How old will Jesus turn this year? Did he have candles on his cake? Will we be invited to his party? Kelly, age 8. When the whale ate Jonah, did he get gas? Norma, age 7. God, did you mean for the giraffe to look like that? Or was that like an accident or something? And little Joel, age 5. Where did you get your Smurf hat from? And that question was directed at a man wearing a turban. And those questions that little kids ask, I mean, they are so funny and they're so interesting. And I remember, like, when I was a little kid, gosh, I was so inquisitive. My little mind was always just a-working. And I remember very early, I was in the 1st grade, and I remember asking my mom, I was like, Mom, you know, like, did Adam and Eve, like, did they have a last name? And if so, like, what was it? Like, what was that last name? And so, you know, she said, well, she didn't know. And so, you know, I remember her getting out this huge book, you know, from underneath the end table, which I thought must have been the good book, but coincidentally turned out to be the Holy and Trusted Phone Book. And so she pulled it out, and Mama got on the line with the library, and after being on hold forever, she called some churches. I remember she called a museum, and she took a good hour, like, just tending to my inquiring mind. And after she hung up, you know, she said, well, it turns out they didn't have one. And I said, oh, okay. And I got to thinking for a minute, and I thought, well, then who had the first last name, and what was it? And then out came the big old book again. You know, Mama loved me. You know, she not that she played along, but she literally was trying to find these things out for me. You know, but there's just something that's so special, you know, about a child's imagination, that yearning to understand. You know, to ask those questions, to know what there is to know. And I love that as odd as their questions, you know, can sometimes be, that still in their own way, the thought process has a logical basis of its own leading up to why they think what they think. And I love that. You see, questions, they served us well in our youth. You know, how did we learn what things were called? How did we learn in school? How did we fill our, you know, the gaps in our minds when we constructed this puzzle? That's life. You know, we ask questions, right? How, when, what, and the most, of course, asked and often unable to answer, why? You know, as kids, we're taught, if you have any questions or if you don't understand something, just raise your hand, you know, and we'll help you. It's the way to learning. It's the way to trusting what is. Ask, raise your hand, and we'll tell you. You see, without questions, there are no answers. But as we kind of like begin to grow in this world, that God-given questioning curiosity that we once had, it gets like systematically worked out of us. You know, at your job, you just follow the rules, you don't ask why. It's not, you know, you don't get to know those things. You don't get to question exactly the whys of the law. Nobody explained that stuff to you. You know, how many of you here have heard the infamous line, because I said so? Oh my gosh, Mom and Dad. And we're like, good Lord, like, you know, like I remember, like, we're like, I know, but why? I'll accept it, but just tell me the reasoning so that I can understand where you are coming from. Like, Mom, is it because it's dangerous? Is it because I might produce a litter of babies by March? Like, just tell me so that I can understand, you know? Like, help me to see the larger picture, and then I'll promise I'll get it. I'll get it better. You know, what happened? You know, I thought you wanted me to raise my hand. Huh. You see, when we get full understanding, when we get that full disclosure, we're more likely to follow. You know, we're more likely to comply because it makes sense to us, because we get it. And we find a deeper trust in those relationships when we do. And so as adults, you know, we seemingly live in a world that welcomes questions. You know, raise your hand, we're here for you. We see suggestion boxes and concierge and Google and, you know, information desk, all kinds of things. I mean, you read and see it all the time. And it's even, you send it out with our information. It's like, if you have any questions or if you need more information, please feel free to contact us at any time. Everybody's always willing to give you that information. And while that may ring true in many places, there's one place more often than not that it is a huge no-no. And that's the church. That's the church. Don't you dare raise your hand and ask those blasphemous questions. You see, most denominations have a very strict no questioning policy. I mean, how many in here have been told that you should not be questioning the Lord, and certainly not the details of His Word, mind you? A lot of people. You see, in your life, whenever you're faced with issues that require this deeper discernment, this time of searching, this time of uncovering. I mean, how many pastors shot you down in your hour of need? Abdicating a blind, silent, unquestioned faith. Don't raise your hand. Just put them together in silence. Have faith. Everything will be fine. And how did that make you feel? Stifled, minimalized, ashamed, unworthy, unfit somehow for thinking those things? And did it help you through that difficult time? Did you learn more about God's love for you? Did it help your faith grow in understanding? Probably not. Many of you have gone, through different times of desperate soul searching. A time when nothing made sense, and when you went to the one place that you turned to, the one person that you trusted knew could give you the answers that you need. And you went there, and it's then that you were told, well, you shouldn't be asking that because God is not the place to bring those doubts and questions. Well, if you don't bring them to Him, where can you take them? How come whenever life gets rough and you start to face, perplexing thoughts and questions, times of uncertainty and confusion and longing, and often filled with those disappointments and struggles that we go to, why do people automatically characterize it as a crisis of faith? I mean, is that a fair assessment to say that? If we pose questions to God, does that mean that somehow we lack righteousness or are somehow less of a Christian because of it? If we examine clobber passages in context, are we somehow blasphemous and unrighteous? I mean, really, are we allowed to question God? Are we allowed? I wonder what the Word says for us today. Today we are going way back to one of our founding fathers. And Roger, it's not George Washington, but rather Abraham. Abraham, who God would later call the father of many nations. And, in today's story, he's still just good old Abram. God has not renamed him Abraham yet. And it really, up until this point, it's really important to understand, the relationship that they had together. And really, to sum it up for you, it's been like this. God speaks, Abram listens. God promises, Abram believes. God commands, Abram obeys. And this has included some crazy leaps of faith. I mean, let me tell you. First, at age 75, he and Sarah, they had just bought into a nice, retirement tent community in their hometown of they haven't got any children, but other than that, they're doing okay. They're enjoying the golden years, maybe a little rock bingo or something. Yeah. That's right. And then boom, God says, hey, Abram, I want you to fold up your tent. You leave your country. I want you to journey far, far away to this place that you've never been before. I'm not telling you where it is, but I'll tell you how to get there. And I promise you, with this land, I'm going to make you a great nation. Sounds awful to do now, much less at 75. But they go. They go. And he goes to the Negev, then he goes to south to Egypt, and then in the process he becomes really wealthy. God is blessing him thus far. After all that, God comes again and says, it's me, God. I'm your shield, Abram. I will give you great reward. You are going to make that great nation from a son who is your own flesh and blood. Oh, okay. Now, up until this point, Abram has been following God. No questions asked. But he kind of gets to looking around his life, like his aging, wrinkled hands. He looks at Sarah and her crippling grief over a lifelong barrenness and says, now, wait a minute, God. I got a question. That's right. The founding father of the Israelites, Abraham, the great model of faithfulness, is questioning God himself. Now, if in your mind, if you can picture all of the clergy of the world today were standing there watching this go down, I imagine they'd all be lined up, real judgmental around, going, "You're unfaithful. You're unfaithful." But what is God's reaction? That's what we care about. That's what matters most, and more than what we've been told. What is God's reaction? What is God's reaction whenever we question him about his promises? How does he respond when we ask for clarification on his word? How? I mean, does he get all angry and accusatory like many Christians do today have told us? Does he rain down fire on Abram right then? Did he scold him? Did he punish him? Did he deem him unworthy of righteousness? I mean, did smoke come out of his nostrils? Was he mad? I mean, what happened? Verse 5. God puts his arm around Abram and he takes him outside and he says, "Look up, Abram. Look up. See all the beauty, the lights, the stars. My stars, look at them twinkling above. There's so many. Try and count them." Gosh, that is how many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that I will give you. And if I could put those in the sky, you better believe that I could sprinkle some descendants in your life. And the word says that Abram trusted and believed God. Now, what exactly did he believe? That he'll have a child? You know, that God can be trusted? That there's lots of stars in the sky? That astronomy's cool? You know, like... I mean, does Abram completely understand how the God will fulfill those promises? I mean, does he have all the answers that he needs? Sure seems unlikely. So God then says to him, "I am your God, and I will give you that land that I promised you. You will possess it." I mean, that's another huge, hard to wrap your mind around promise. But that's okay. Abram trusts now. He's done seeing the stars, y'all. So let's hear his trusting response. "So, okay, God. But how do I know that I'm going to possess it?" is what he says, word for word. How do I know that I'm going to? Well, he did trust God. I thought he did a few minutes ago anyway. But it's question after question today, even after he's been following God all this time. You know, many miles, many years, and even after years of asking no questions at all, which we sometimes have all done. Even after he comes to trust in God, even after all that, even from a place of profound faith, still, Abram questions God. He keeps raising that darn hand. You see, now surely this must be where God gets angry and impatient and curses his unfaithfulness, right? This must be it. No. God instead offers his hand, and he extends it to invitation to something beyond imagination. God says, "Go, get, and bring to my altar a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon," and then chop them all in half. Now to us it just sounds like some messy farm animal mutilation that requires a call to PETA. But it's more, I guarantee you it's more. During those days, I mean, this was a very specific, those animals that he asked and the way he wanted them to offer them on the altar was very specific. And it was elaborate, and it was a very special ritual. It was an ancient version of a divine contract. And by enacting this ritual, both parties agree to stay in relationship with one another. You know, so like by participating, God is saying, "I will continue to be with you, Abram. I will continue to be with you, and I will do what I have promised." And Abram is promising to do the same as well. I mean, that's what a covenant is. A covenant is an exchanging of promises. So really, when you think about it, like, well, what did Abram's questions get him? And it might disappoint you, but they don't get him all the answers. I mean, you know, the ritual in no way shows Abram how the land will be obtained. I mean, no maps or battle plans or to-do lists, emerge from the ashes. Nothing like that happened. But what the ritual does do is it promises Abram that God's presence will be there all the time. No matter what. To-do lists get finished and no longer useful. But God's presence is lasting and needed all the time. And so, stepping back and looking at the story, what is it that elicits this gift of divine presence? What instigates this covenant that lasted until this day, that we still live under? What was it? It was Abram's questions. It's only when Abram questions God that God proposes the covenant ritual. It's only when Abram questions God that the promise of presence is formalized and sealed. You see? It's Abram's questions that keep him connected to God in a very, very, very profound way. It's his questions that bond him to his faith, keeping it alive for years. Now, this might sound strange to those of you who grew up in faith communities where questioning your faith was a sure sign that you didn't have any. Through the story of Abram, we can see that questions, they don't preclude your faith, but they are central to it. I mean, strong faith is a questioning faith. Asking questions of God can be the very thing that keeps us connected to Him. In fact, in the midst of Abram's questionings, God credits him with righteousness. Verse 6, that's right, righteousness. It is a key piece of our spiritual journeys. Do you want to learn from God about His plan for your life, about the people and events in His Word? Then raise your hand and ask Him. He's waiting for those questions. God knows it is how we learn. I mean, He instilled that questioning spirit in us as kids for a reason. Use it. Raise your hand. And when you do, you'll find that it's not anger or cursedness or blasphemous accusations of unfaithfulness that you will find from Him. You may hear it on this earth, but you will not hear that from Him. Instead, He will put His arm around you and He will show you the stars. He will show you the beauty and power and presence that is found in His creation. And even more astounding and reassuring, He will extend His hand to you. He will offer in exchange for your promise His. That is the kind of patient and loving God that we serve. Do you have your own questions that are inside you for God? Maybe you've been afraid to ask them because somebody told you that you shouldn't. Maybe now, today, you can free yourself to do so. I mean, if even the Father of nations can raise His hand, we surely can too. You know, if you're wrestling through some tough questions in your life right now, perhaps the best place to start, finding answers and trying to get some resolution is just by looking up and seeing that beautiful night canvas and the twinkling stars from heaven. You see, it's when we see His creation, we see that might. We see that artistry, and we witness the power that it takes to create and sustain something of that magnitude. It is then that we realize that God can do the same very thing in our lives. Though what you're going through right now, it may seem impossible to you, but the proof is in the stars. After all these years, they haven't fallen out yet. God can take your uncertainties and turn them into something beautiful and lasting and something that is breathtaking. If you are struggling today, perhaps the message from this scripture is as simple as this for you. Go there. Go there. Go to that special place, your special place. You know where it is. You know what I'm talking about. Maybe it's been a while, but now is time to go to that place in creation where you go whenever you need to think. Perhaps it's the ocean or the beach for you. Maybe it is the stars. Maybe it's a wooded trail or a lake. You know where it is. Maybe you need to go there. God met Abraham there, and He will you too. That's the promise. That's the covenant. Go into nature, into His creation. Just don't chop up any animals while you're there. The good news today is that your questions don't indicate a lack of faith, but rather the evidence of a strong and growing faith. It's one that's eager to learn more. Questions give answers about God and His promises. And God honors those questions. He wants to hear them. And He promises to be present with you as you wrestle through whatever it is that you are going through. So what's keeping you back? What's holding you back? Ask away, raise your hand, because it just might be the most faithful thing you ever do.